Madison Rivera had always known that marrying into the wealthy Thornfield family would come with challenges, but she never anticipated that her biggest obstacle would be her mother-in-law, Eleanor Thornfield, a cold and calculating woman who had spent 35 years building a real estate empire in Charleston, South Carolina, and who viewed Madison's middle-class background and Puerto Rican heritage as a threat to the family's social standing and carefully cultivated reputation. When Madison first met her future husband, Christopher Thornfield, during her final year at the College of Charleston, where she was studying marketing on a partial scholarship while working 2 part-time jobs to pay for her education, she was immediately drawn to his kindness and genuine interest in her dreams of starting her own digital marketing agency, never realizing that his mother had already begun investigating her family's financial situation and planning ways to end their relationship before it could become serious. Eleanor had raised Christopher as a single mother after her husband died in a car accident when the boy was only 8 years old, and she had poured all of her protective instincts and controlling tendencies into shaping him into the perfect heir to her business empire, carefully screening his friends, monitoring his activities, and making it clear that his future wife would need to meet her exacting standards for breeding, education, and social connections that Madison clearly lacked. The first 2 years of Madison's marriage to Christopher were relatively peaceful, because Eleanor was traveling frequently for business and seemed to accept that her son had made his choice. But everything changed when Eleanor was diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer and decided to move into the guest house on Christopher and Madison's property in Mount Pleasant, ostensibly to be closer to her medical team, but really to begin the systematic destruction of their marriage through a campaign of psychological manipulation that was so subtle and expertly executed that Madison didn't recognize it until it was almost too late. Eleanor began by planting seeds of doubt about Madison's commitment to the family, mentioning casually during family dinners that she had noticed Madison working late again instead of spending time at home, suggesting that perhaps Madison's career ambitions were more important to her than building a strong marriage, and pointing out that most of the successful women in their social circle had given up their businesses after getting married to focus on supporting their husbands and raising children. When Madison tried to discuss Eleanor's comments with Christopher, he initially defended his wife and dismissed his mother's concerns as old-fashioned thinking, but Eleanor was patient and persistent, gradually escalating her manipulation by creating situations where Madison would appear selfish, ungrateful, or disrespectful in front of Christopher, then positioning herself as the peacemaker who was only trying to help them work through their communication problems. The turning point came when Eleanor discovered that Madison had been corresponding with her estranged father, who had left the family when Madison was 12 years old and who had recently reached out through social media asking for a chance to rebuild their relationship, and Eleanor used this information as ammunition in her campaign to convince Christopher that his wife was emotionally unstable and hiding important secrets from him. Eleanor presented Christopher with printed copies of Madison's private messages with her father, claiming she had found them accidentally while helping to organize Madison's home office, and she carefully highlighted the parts where Madison expressed conflicted feelings about her childhood and admitted to feeling abandoned and unloved, twisting these vulnerable confessions into evidence that Madison was psychologically damaged and unfit to be part of their family. Over the following months, Eleanor orchestrated a series of increasingly elaborate scenarios designed to make Madison appear irresponsible and untrustworthy, including scheduling important family events at times when she knew Madison had work commitments, then expressing disappointment when Madison couldn't attend, and inviting Christopher's old girlfriends to social gatherings while making pointed comments about how much more suitable they had been for him. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Eleanor convinced Christopher to have Madison followed by a private investigator, claiming she was concerned about some of Madison's recent behavior and wanted to make sure she wasn't having an affair or struggling with substance abuse. And when the investigator found nothing suspicious, Eleanor suggested that Madison must be very skilled at hiding her problems, and that Christopher should consider whether he really knew his wife at all. Christopher, who had always trusted his mother's judgment and had been raised to believe that family loyalty was more important than any other relationship, began pulling away from Madison emotionally and physically, questioning her every decision and treating her like a stranger in their own home, while Eleanor played the role of the concerned mother-in-law who was heartbroken to see her son's marriage falling apart, but powerless to fix problems that Madison had apparently created. The final straw came when Eleanor arranged for Christopher to discover what appeared to be evidence that Madison was planning to leave him, planting documents in Madison's car that suggested she had been consulting with divorce attorneys and hiding money in secret accounts, when in reality, Eleanor had created these false documents herself using her connections in the legal and financial communities to make them appear authentic. When Christopher confronted Madison with this evidence, demanding explanations for bank statements she had never seen and legal consultations she had never attended. Madison realized that she was trapped in an impossible situation where her own husband believed his mother's lies over her desperate protests of innocence, and she understood that Eleanor had successfully destroyed their marriage, using weapons that Madison hadn't even known existed. Rather than continue fighting a battle she couldn't win, Madison made the strategic decision to appear to surrender, agreeing to the divorce that Christopher was demanding and accepting a settlement that Eleanor had clearly designed to be as humiliating as possible, requiring Madison to sign away any claim to the family business and agree never to contact Christopher again. But what Eleanor didn't realize was that Madison had spent the past year quietly documenting every manipulation, recording conversations, and gathering evidence of Eleanor's systematic campaign to destroy her marriage. The revenge that Madison orchestrated was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness, beginning with her decision to use Eleanor's own tactics against her by slowly and carefully presenting Christopher with evidence of his mother's deception, not all at once in a way that would seem vindictive, but gradually and strategically, allowing him to discover each piece of the puzzle naturally and draw his own conclusions about who had really been lying to him. Madison started by having copies of Eleanor's falsified documents analyzed by forensic accountants and handwriting experts, then arranged for Christopher to receive these reports anonymously, as if they were part of a routine audit or investigation that had nothing to do with Madison directly, and she watched from a distance as Christopher began questioning the evidence that had convinced him to end their marriage. Over several months, Madison systematically revealed Eleanor's entire web of lies and manipulations, using Eleanor's own contacts and social connections to ensure that the truth reached Christopher through sources he would trust, and she took particular satisfaction in exposing Eleanor's relationship with the private investigator, who was revealed to have been paid to fabricate reports rather than conduct legitimate surveillance. The most devastating revelation came when Madison presented Christopher with recordings of conversations where Eleanor explicitly discussed her plans to destroy their marriage and expressed her satisfaction at successfully turning him against his wife. Recordings that Madison had obtained legally through her own investigation into Eleanor's activities, and that clearly demonstrated the calculated cruelty behind Eleanor's actions. Christopher's response to learning the truth was swift and absolute, cutting off all contact with his mother, removing her from the family business, and filing for legal guardianship of her medical decisions based on evidence that her manipulative behavior suggested early-stage dementia or psychological instability that made her unfit to manage her own affairs. Eleanor, who had built her entire identity around controlling her son and maintaining her position as the most important woman in his life, found herself completely isolated and powerless, banned from Christopher's home and business, and facing the prospect of spending her remaining years in a nursing facility where Madison had carefully ensured she would receive adequate medical care, but no special treatment or privileges. The final act of Madison's revenge was remarrying Christopher in a small private ceremony where Eleanor was not invited or informed, and using the prenuptial agreement that Eleanor had insisted upon during their first marriage to protect Madison's own business interests and ensure that no future mother-in-law would ever have the power to destroy what she had built through her own hard work and determination. Eleanor's attempts to contact Christopher through lawyers, mutual friends, and even showing up at his office were all unsuccessful, and her desperate letters begging for forgiveness and claiming that her cancer treatment had affected her judgment were returned unopened, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions with the same isolation and manipulation that she had used as weapons against Madison. The lesson Madison learned from this devastating experience was that sometimes the most effective revenge is simply allowing someone to experience the exact consequences of their own actions, and that people who use love as a weapon to control others will inevitably find themselves alone when their victims finally recognize the difference between genuine care and emotional manipulation, leaving them with nothing but their own cruelty for company.